Hi YouTube and welcome back to my channel. So this video I'm going to focus on my 30s. This is the last video I'm going to do focused on the entire decade of my life. So the last one that's going to be super long. And then starting with the next video, I'm going to count down the rest of my 40s, starting with that. Well, I just said that with the next video. So where I left off, I had at the end of my 20s, I graduated with my Master's of Science and I turned 30. And so with my, ability to start with having a master's degree under my belt, and I'm now 30, and my main focus since my relationship with Barthold at the end of my 20s ended back in 99, and I was, I think, 28, 29 at the time. And so, I wasn't in a long-term relationship. I was now finished with my master's, and so I was no longer taking grad classes along with working full-time. And so I really kind of focused in just kind of two areas in my life. As I focused on my career and focused on going out and dating a lot. Mostly through, with the dating stuff, I mostly went through like Match.com and OkCupid and that kind of stuff. Back in those days, I don't know if Match still does this because I have not done online dating since 2005. 2005 is like when I canceled all my accounts and stuff, and so it's been a minute. But back then, Match.com was hosting a lot of like in-person live events, and so you could go on their website and like look at like local where you lived, and I'm in northern Colorado, so I was looking at local northern Colorado events and also going down to Denver and stuff. And there were like wine tastings and hikes, and there were things that I wasn't into. Like there was I think there's some rock climbing stuff and some mountain biking stuff and things like that. And I'm not into either of those. But I did go on one hike in Boulder, and I went to some wine tasting events and that kind of thing. So there were kind of like mix and mingle things, which were kind of fun, and you got to meet people and everything. Didn't really meet a lot of folks that ended up into any kind of dates or anything at any of those events. You just sat around and chatted and got to know each other and stuff, and then kind of parted ways. And some people hooked up, I guess, and some people didn't. And I was not one of the ones that got to hook up with anyone. I'm being socially awkward. I tried, but it did not work for me. And then I think eventually Match.com ended those. I don't know if they ever started them up again. I think I heard that they did, but I don't know if they kept going or not. But I believe that there were some liability issues with some of the events, and in probably inappropriate behavior or whatever. And so there were reasons why I know that while I was still on Match.com, that they stopped doing those. And so then I joined, I think I went through, excuse the jingles if you're hearing those. That's one of my dogs deciding to to be in the background. Anyway, so when I wasn't really having that much luck with the online dating. I mean, I did get a lot of like first dates through the website itself, where people would we'd contact each other, and we'd email back and forth and have a phone call, and then like, hey, you want to meet up for coffee or drinks, or maybe have dinner or something. And so I went on a lot of like first dates like that, and then as soon as we met each other in person, the chemistry just wasn't there, or it was for one of us, it wasn't for the other. There were a few times when the guys were like into me, and I was just like totally like just nah, just wasn't feeling it. And there were other times when like I was very much gung-ho for the guy, but the guy was like, I just never heard from him again. Every now and again, there were a few times where it ended up in a few other dates, where we'd maybe go out for about 4 or 6 weeks, and then eventually it would fizzle. So nothing substantial ever happened with that. But then I did go and find a meetup.com, and started joining a lot of child-free events. Because I figured, let me go. Because one of the biggest problems I ran into with the dating sites was, even though I very clearly said on my profile, no one seems to read profiles apparently, but I was always like, I am child free, I am an atheist, do not ask me out if you want me to raise your kids and or go to church with you, because that's not gonna happen. And I had so many single dad Christians who were like, I don't know if they were trying to convert me. I don't know, but it was just not happening. Like, you clearly are not reading my profile. And so I got fed up with that, and so I joined some child-free groups. No Kidding was actually like the No Kidding had a meetup group, but then they also had their own website and everything else, and they had a headquarters in Denver and stuff, and so there were a lot of Denver meetups. Even though we kind of there were a bunch of us here up in northern Colorado that kind of branched off and had our own stuff, and we ultimately split with No Kidding in the end, and that's where my current core circle of friends came from, as I met them through No Kidding and ultimately through our own group that's branched off and stuff. And long story short, ultimately that's how I eventually got into meeting Dave. So our group split off. There was one guy that was kind of like our group leader in a way, because he had like the best house for hosting parties and stuff, and he liked hosting and he liked cooking and being all fancy and stuff, and so he would host like Halloween parties, and he'd have a crab boil every year, and just like lots of different social events and things. And he worked at the time he was working in HP. A lot of the people I know either worked at Hewlett Packard or Intel or AMD, or like, we have a lot of tech companies in the area. And I worked, at the time I was working at LSI, which was also one of the smaller tech companies. I was working in their digital marketing department, where everyone else I knew were engineers. They had backgrounds in computer science and electrical engineering and that kind of thing, and they were designing computer chips and motherboards and that kind of stuff. So I know a lot of people in that industry. And ultimately, Dave, my late husband, he was friends with them. He wasn't in the No Kidding group, but he was also essentially child-free as well. And so he started coming to some of the events and parties and things. And so ultimately, that's how I met him. And I'll get into that in a minute. So I was doing a lot of the dating stuff, and just kind of, figuring out, what I wanted in a relationship at the time. And at the same time was also like working on my career and things and kind of developing that. And one of the things that I was very grateful for is I had a really great manager. She was an amazing lady, and she, like, because my there was a coworker of mine that had seniority over me in our local office. Our manager was in California, we were in Colorado, and this other lady, she was really trying to steer my career in the direction she thought my career should go. Not necessarily where I wanted to go with my own career. She thought that it would be better if I went more into development and programming and writing code and that kind of thing. And I had some skill for it, but it wasn't a passion of mine. I did take some pro classes and that kind of thing, and I was doing a lot of I could do a lot of HTML and CSS and web development in that area. But as things started progressing into JavaScript and PHP and a lot of these more advanced programming languages, I don't even know what everything is these days. I know HTML5 is the big thing nowadays. I'm sure PHP is still a big thing these days, and I'm not sure whatever else. JavaScript's probably out there still. But anyway, there were a lot of programming and that kind of stuff that I just really wasn't into. Was not like I could do it, but I wasn't enjoying it. And during one of my business trips out to California, our manager sat me down, took me out to lunch, and said, "Hey, you know what? I'm doing an individual lunch with everybody, and I want to kind of have a better handle on where you want your career to go." And I told her, it's like, you know, because I think she was the one who said, you know, like, I was told that, you know, by your coworker that you're really great at the programming stuff and that's where you should go. And I was like, I'm not enjoying that. And she was like, at first she was surprised. She was like, oh, you know, I was kind of taking our team in this direction because I thought that's where our strengths were. And I know that we had one person on our team who was really good at programming. You know, he was also more of a creative person as well, but he was good at coding and programming and development, and he enjoyed it as well. So for him, it was more of a balance, and so he ultimately ended up becoming more of our senior developer on the team. And I kind of was able to shift my focus more and go into more of the creative side of the web development side of things. You know, with having a solid knowledge of coding and programming and things, so I was better at communicating between the developers and the marketing people, because I kind of understood things from both angles. And so I was able to tell the people on the marketing side, you know, I'm sorry, we can't give you this functionality because it just doesn't work that way. And I could explain it to them in a language that they understood. And I could then also translate, you know, things like from what the marketing people said. It's like, okay, they say they want X, Y, and Z. It's more it's more like L, M, N, O, P, and Q is what they're really looking for. But you know, they're saying this, but what they're really, you know, I kind of understood more of like the marketing people would say something. I knew what they really wanted, but the IT people would try and, you know, there was a lot of miscommunication between the two sides, and I was really good at conveying the true meaning of what was really needed for the website and stuff. And that was one of the things I was telling my managers, like, you know, I'm really good at doing this kind of stuff. And we had just started working with an analytics tool and looking more at the data, and then using that data to improve the website and things. And so that was another aspect that I was really enjoying. And so she really kind of helped me carve out my career better at the company and everything, and helped me kind of really blossom and grow with my career at the time. So that was pretty amazing. So I had that going on, and I had all this dating stuff going on. And then I met Dave. Met him at one of my friend's crab boils. I still remember very clearly that day. Normally my friend had the crab boil in his backyard with big folding tables and lots of newspaper. The way you have the crab boils where you just dump all the food out on the table and you just eat with your fingers, and it's like real caveman style kind of stuff, and it was a lot of fun. It was great. That year, unfortunately, we had really bad weather. I think it was like 50 degrees and pouring rain outside. So he still did the crab boil. I think he set everything up for the boil itself in the kitchen, and then everyone was in his basement to be served food and stuff. And that was the first time Dave attended any of the events that I had been to, and we met, and we hit it off like that. I mean, Keith introduced us, and I think the two of us just spent the entire 3 or 4 hours just talking, and we talked about sci-fi and science and lots of geeky nerdy things, and I was really into him. I thought he was kind of cute, and I had kind of given up on dating at this point. I had already shut down all my dating accounts. I was just kind of done and over with the whole dating thing, but then I was like, ooh, who is this person? And he seemed to be into me, but then he never asked for my number, and I never, I kept running into him after that. I would go out with friends of mine for dinner, and he'd be at the same restaurant, and we'd say hi. Or we'd be in a group gathering or a party or something, and he'd be there. And I thought, well, he just must not be very much into me, and so like, yeah, okay, fine. Well, maybe at least we can be friends. And there was several months later, like six months later, there was a Burns Night party that my friend was hosting. He always did Burns Night every year as well. Burns Night is celebrating I think the birthday of Robert Burns in January, and you serve traditional Scottish food, haggis and that kind of thing. And I'm weird. I actually like haggis. I know what's in it. I think it tastes good. I'm weird. I grew up eating German food, and there's a lot of weird stuff in German food, and the stuff tasted to me very similar to some of the food that I was raised on with the German food, so maybe that's why I like it. I don't know. And you also do a lot of Scotch tasting and drinking. Tasting, drinking, tasting, drinking, you know. And Dave, once he had enough alcohol in him, he became a little bit more expressive and open and talkative. And I cornered him. I nailed him, and I said, look, I know you're not into me. He was actually bragging about girls and how he knows he's only a 6, but he only dates 9s or 10s, or some stupid male egotistical shit like that. And I was like, okay, so how would you rate me? Now, remember, I'm trans, for those of you who are new to this channel, and I used to be female presenting. And at the time, I was female presenting, even though I was very tomboy presenting, because I had, my hair was short, and I was, I wasn't wearing a dress or anything like that. I was wearing a turtleneck sweater or something like that at the time. And he looked at me, and he was like, you're a 4. Now, the entire table, everyone went, ooh, you know, like they were expecting me to explode on him and get angry and stuff. But again, I'm, you know, like, I was female presenting, you know, I wasn't out as trans. I didn't even know what trans was at the time. I'm very naive. Anyway, but I did not react the way everyone thought I was going to react. I laughed. I was like, well, I laughed, and then I thanked him for his honesty. I was like, hey, you're honest. I appreciate that. That surprised him as well. And over the next 6 months after that, he kind of started treating me a little differently. He didn't ask me out, but we started developing a closer friendship, and which was kind of interesting. And I think he started seeing me differently, and I think he started crushing on me as well. But at that point, he was like, "Oh, I blew it. You know, I said that this person is a 4, so they think I'm not attracted to them." And it's, you know, it was one of those, like, now out of embarrassment, he didn't want to ask me out. But he was also kind of lusting after a lesbian friend of ours, which was kind of bizarre, because, like, she very clearly was like, no, I am not into you. And at one of the summer parties the next summer, at our friend's house, he was trying to follow after her and her girlfriend as they were leaving to go have, you know, some private time together. And she just put her foot down. She was like, I don't know what you think you're doing, but go back into that party. Leave us alone. Go ask this other person out, because you know you like them, and you know they like you, and you know, get off our backs. And so he kind of slunk like a puppy with his tail between his legs back to the party, and then he did come and ask me to, hey, you want to go get some coffee? So yeah, I played second fiddle to a lesbian that wasn't interested in him at all. So yeah, so there's that. But we did go and have coffee and have a long talk, and it was like, well, you know, if you want to, maybe we should go out on a date. And so I was like, well, I'm still attracted to you, so it's up to you. And so we did end up going on a date. I still remember we did a very cliche dinner and a movie date. Went out to one of my favorite restaurants at the time. Sadly, they closed down a few months after that. And then we went to see Superman Returns as a movie. I still remember that. Still like that movie. It wasn't. It's not one of the more popular ones, but I actually thought Brandon Routh did a really good job playing Superman. Um, they did a lot of recall back to some of the classic Superman comic books and stuff in that movie, so I actually thought that was good. So, anywho, so that's how things started with Dave. It took a good year, a little bit of nagging on my part, and a lot of shoving from his lesbian friend on her part to to get us together. But eventually we did, and things just kind of progressed from there. Then about, let's see, I think Dave and I had been dating for about 2 years. Yeah, about 2 years, because we, well, about a year or two, and he was really he was very much into finance and investments and that kind of thing, and had spent a lot of time building up his own wealth, he lived very frugally and did a lot of investing and stuff to try and build up his portfolio and stuff, and he had done a pretty good job of it. And I was still renting an apartment because I never had a large enough amount of savings to use as a down payment to get a mortgage on a house. Even though I had a decent salary, I think I was making $65K at the time. No, I was making $50K. Yeah, I was making 50, and then there's this whole long thing of me being stuck at a entry-level position for 10 years, and then I finally kind of confronted my director and told him, like, you know, I'm entry-level, I've been here 10 years, and that's when they finally pushed me up to the level I was supposed to be and gave me like a $15,000 raise, and so I went from 50K to 65K. But, you know, when I was still making 50K, and I was renting an apartment, and Dave was like, you know, you're throwing your money away by renting. You know, you should be investing in property, which was a big thing for him. And my apartment complex was gonna hike my rent by, I think I was going from $600 to $800 a month or something ridiculous at the next time that they were renewing my lease. And I was like, well, you know, I'd love to buy a house, but I don't have a down payment. What am I gonna do? And so this is the kind of guy he was. But he was like, well, what if I buy a property and then you rent it from me, paying the mortgage payment? So he was gonna do the down payment and stuff, and then he said, then later on, you know, you can buy it from me, and then you can pay me back the down payment. So I was like, well, if you're willing to do that, I mean, it's a super generous thing to offer. At the time, we did not want to live in the same house. We wanted to live separately and still maintain a relationship and stuff. Several of our friends were doing similar things, and it worked out really well for them, and we thought it would work out really well for us because we both had very different living styles. I had cats, he was allergic. He was a bit of a slob and a little bit of a hoarder, and I liked a clean place to live, and so it was in our both best interest to have separate places to live. And so he was like, yeah. And so we actually did house hunt together, put an offer on one place that ultimately fell through, and then in the end I ended up with a townhouse that we found that was really nice. It was a good price, and was within my price range in terms of the monthly mortgage payments he was going to pay that I had to pay him. And so it ultimately worked out really well. So we did that. 3 months later, I got laid off of work. 3 months after closing, I had just moved in to the place about 3 months before I got delayed. Yeah, it was like we bought the place, we closed on the place, I moved into the place, just, you know, in time for me to let go of my lease of my apartment because of all that, and then I get laid off. There's a whole long story drama behind that one, which I won't get into, because it was a year after I got my promotion and raise that I got laid off. Yeah. So there was that. Anyhow, So it was like, oh crap, you know, how am I going to do this? And this is most of my friends at the time were starting to retire, start their own businesses, do consulting work, that kind of thing. And so I decided to try my hand at consulting because there weren't really a lot of jobs in terms of the kind of stuff I was doing anymore. I really wanted to do more web analytics and things, and so I was like, well, I could do that from home and I could consult doing that. And so I was collecting unemployment and I had some severance and stuff, and then I started ramping up my business and things. Landed a client in Boulder who ultimately actually hired me as an employee before I got laid off of that. That was like another year. And so I got laid off a second time a year later. With more drama and crap in that. And if you want to know some of my losing of employment through drama stories, I think I mentioned a couple in the last videos, but if you want more details on all that stuff, leave me a comment below and I'll make a separate video from these so that this one doesn't get too ridiculously long. But that second layoff, and the second one happened on Halloween. There was going to be a big Halloween party at the company. I was in costume already. I actually dressed up as the Swiss Miss, and I actually brought hot chocolate for everyone in my department because I thought that was cute. And then it was myself and another person in my department. Both of us got laid off at the same day. And we're in the office with the vice president, you know, in costume, and yeah, it was a whole thing. And then I drove home, and we had a party at my friend's house that night as well that I was going to go to. And I went to that party with Dave, and everyone kind of knew what had happened to me. So I was not in a good place. And so they did what they could to cheer me up. I had a few drinks, but I didn't overdo it. I never overdo it with alcohol. That's not my thing. But then I went home with Dave, because at the time we would sleep over at each other's place on occasion. And so I just went home with Dave, and I never left. I just kind of I was just in a fog. I just didn't know where I was going to go with anything for a while there. I kind of floundered. Eventually I kind of gained my footing again, started looking for consulting clients again, and I was like, never am I going to let them hire me as an employee again. I'm going to stick with the consulting. And got some good leads, and from there built a decent client base and everything. But while that was all going on, ultimately, Dave and I came to an agreement, and I started running the townhouse as an investment property for Dave. And I moved all my stuff out of the place. Some of it went in storage because there just wasn't room at Dave's place, and I wasn't ready to figure out what to do with it all yet. And so we moved everything into a storage unit, moved some stuff into his place, and got it all cleaned out and rented it out. And so I went and I put together a rental agreement, vetted people to rent it to. Our first tenant ended up being this really great gentleman who he was basically traveling around the country renting an apartment for a year at a time in different locations and getting to know the area, doing a lot of hiking and bicycling and that kind of thing, and then moving to another location. And he was just kind of exploring the United States in his retirement by doing this. That was kind of cool. And he was a great tenant, took great care of the place. Second tenants, not so much. I will not go into that either, because that's going to be another long story. But the second tenants were enough of a problem that we ultimately ended up having to get property managers to help us out. And thankfully, we had neighbors across the street who were realtors and property managers, and we told them what was going on. They were like, hey, we can help you out. And they even gave us a break on their percentage that they charge, because I think they usually charge like 7 or 8% of whatever we were charging for rent. So me and math, but you know, take 8% of $800 and figure that out, or 1,200. Because ultimately, I think we ended up increasing the rent too to filter out some of the more problematic people. That's actually one of the reasons why rents go up, is to keep problematic people out of your properties. It's not always a greedy thing. It's more of a, well, these people are more likely to trash the place, and therefore, I know it's a terrible practice. There are plenty of really good, hardworking, low-income people who don't trash their places, but you know, it takes one rotten apple and it just spoils you, because you just don't want to have to deal with it again. You know, so we ended up ultimately going in that route and everything. And when Dave eventually passed, which, you know, I'll obviously that's going to be a whole thing with my Into My 40s video. I just ultimately sold that property because it was just I'd had it at that point. But so yeah, that's what we did. Was I moved in with Dave, and we turned that into an income property, and we just cohabitated at that point. And it was like, we hadn't planned to, but I was not, from a mental standpoint, it took me a good year or two to kind of get to a point where I felt safe with where my consultant, and I ultimately, my consulting business ended up taking off and doing really well. I ended up with over a dozen Fortune 500 company clients, and I was able to raise my rates really well, and so things were going really well for me. You know, it took a few years for me to build up my client list and everything, but I got enough income from that, so I was able to go to the Adobe Summits every year, because I ended up specializing in Adobe Analytics on that particular tool set, and making friends, you know, among a lot of like high elite corporate executives and things. And so that was actually kind of a cool time. That was a great time career wise for me, and I was really proud of what I accomplished with all of that and everything. Another thing that Dave and I did a lot was travel together, and we traveled together really well. Not everyone travels together well. If you want to test a relationship, that's one way to test a relationship, is to travel together and see how well you get along without your normal amenities and escape options and things. We went to Puerto Rico twice. We honeymooned in Belize. That's in my 40s, so that's actually not in my 30s yet. But we traveled. We went to Montana for his birthday one year, and yeah, well, like I said, we traveled a lot, and we got along really well when we traveled. It was really great. We'd drive up to Montana to for the holidays to visit his parents, and every year, and that was actually one of the first trips we did when we first got together, because when we got together, that first date in a movie kind of thing, like, he and I were we'd been burned before with relationships and stuff quite a bit, and so we were both hesitant to like get into any kind of declarations of I love you and all that kind of stuff. We were both very practical minded people. Neither one of us was very, very romantic, and but he was like, hey, you want to come up and meet my family for Christmas this year and come with me for Christmas? That's when I knew that things were probably going to be serious between the two of us, as he wanted me to meet his family. And I was the first person that he'd ever dated that he'd brought home to meet family, especially during the holidays, but ever. Like, so that was kind of momentous. They'd all thought he was a confirmed bachelor at that point, so that was kind of cool. Let's see, so because I'm getting towards the end of my 30s, right, so getting near the end of my 30s, obviously that's when I started thinking about starting the YouTube channel, because I was 39 at the time. I actually had the summer before my 40th birthday, I had a 39 and a half birthday party. where I had lots of people over, because my birthday is in December, and so it's always cold, and you can never have a barbecue, so I wanted a summer party for my birthday, and I thought, oh, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it in the summer and do 39 and a half. I could have had a 49 and a half birthday this summer, but with COVID and everything still going on, and a lot of my friends are still kind of like, meh. So I decided not to do that this year. So I'm just gonna do a gathering for my 50th in December at my favorite restaurant and call it good. But yeah, so I had a 39 and a half birthday party, and I did the 40th countdown to my birthday and everything. And then for when I hit 40, that's when Dave and I got engaged. And it was like the least romantic thing ever. We just kind of we were sitting down and having a conversation. And he was like, I'm really concerned about your health insurance costs, and I talked to my HR people, and they will not let opposite sex couples have codependent, like, I forget what it's called, not domestic partner, but there was a thing, like, if you're a same-sex couple and you couldn't, this was right around the time when gay marriage wasn't yet quite there yet. I think it became legal. It became legal afterwards, but at the time it wasn't legal yet. And so if we had been same sex, which at the time we weren't, since I was still female presenting, and so because we were opposite sex, they required us to be legally married before we could have joint health insurance. But if you were same sex, you didn't have to have marriage to have the health. Yeah, it was bizarre. Like, they were very supportive of people in a gay relationship, but if you were straight, you had to be married. So it was like, all right, fine, whatever. And so Dave was like, so you wanna, should we get married so that we can, I want you to marry me so that we can, so we can save money on health insurance costs. And I was like, all right. and literally, like, the next day, I think I went down to JCPenney and looked at some rings, and one of the things we agreed on was that we liked sapphires. Sapphire was they do sapphires in Montana. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find any Montana sapphires, so we just whatever, we'll just get a generic sapphire, which probably, came from somewhere that, was less than savory, but, whatever. We wanted we did not want to spend a lot of money on a ring. And so, found 3 rings that I liked, modeled them, took photos of them, sent them through my cell phone to him, and it was like, pick one. And he picked one, and I was like, all right, let's get this one sized. And then, a couple weeks later, we picked it up, and then we announced that we were officially engaged. And that was it. There was no going down on a knee or anything like that. And again, I am not right. Neither one of us were romantic people. We're like, it's superfluous. And at that point, had been together like 5 or 6 years, and it was like, we don't need all this fancy crap. It just, you want to get married? Yeah, whatever. Okay, let's get married. And now that was the end of the conversation. And then our actual getting married was the following June, and we just literally, like, on his lunch break, went down to the courthouse. And in Colorado, you can self-officiate. So we went down to the courthouse, got the paperwork. We could not do it in front of the clerk, and so we just kind of walked off around the corner. And do you? I do. All right, sign it. All right, bring it back to the clerk, and we were legally married. It's that easy in Colorado. It really is. Which is, for me, it was kind of cool. And Dave had to go back to work, and since I was still running, my consulting business at the time, and I just freed up my day that day, and I ran over to the Social Security office to file the paperwork there. And I had decided to hyphenate my name with mine and his, because my business was under my last name, with my last name being, the name of the business. and I didn't want to have to rebrand the business. And so I was like, well, let me hyphenate because I still want your name. Because there were a number of instances where having his last name would have saved us some hassle in certain instances. And so I figured, well, if we're going to be married, I might as well have your name there, but I need to keep this other name as well. And so I ultimately ended up with a hyphenated name at the time. And so, you know, took care of all of that. And then a month after that, we had a big reception where we had friends and family. So we never had a formal ceremony. We could have had like a friend officiate an I do ceremony kind of a thing, but we decided because some of his family was really religious and all this stuff, and a lot of our friends were atheists and everything else, and he was more of an agnostic Buddhist philosophy, you know, spiritual but not religious person, and I'm just a total atheist. And so we decided, let's just not do the ceremony, because there's gonna be somebody who's gonna be offended by how we do the ceremony. Because if we went the religious route, we'd offend the folks who weren't, and if we went the non-religious secular route, we would have, you know. So it just, to stave off any conflict, we're like, we're not having a ceremony. We're just gonna offend everybody. Equal opportunity offense. If you don't like that we don't have a ceremony, tough cookies. You know, we got legally married, you know, at the courthouse, and you're just getting a party, and that's it. And ultimately everyone was happy with that. You know, we had it at a local hotel, and we had it catered, and we had dancing, and we had food, and you know, it just was a nice big party, and we had a lot of fun. And that's kind of how I ended my 30s and entered my 40s, was with that. And so this video is once again mega long, and if you're still here, thank you for listening. Going forward, we'll get into the rest of my 40s 1 year at a time, and the videos should be a lot shorter. I promise. So until tomorrow, take care. Bye-bye.